The golden light of sunset streamed through the tall windows of the Grand Harmony Hall, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. The annual charity gala for the city's underprivileged children was in full swing. Men in tailored suits and women in elegant dresses mingled, their laughter and conversation creating a steady hum beneath the soft classical music played by the string quartet in the corner. Thomas Richardson stood near the bar, a glass of scotch in his hand. At 48, he commanded attention without trying, his salt and pepper hair perfectly trimmed, his posture straight from years of boardroom battles. As the CEO of Richardson Enterprises, he'd built a technology empire from the ground up, turning a small startup into a Fortune 500 company in just 15 years. Quite the turnout this year. "Thomas," said Harold Wu, sliding up beside him. Harold was Thomas's chief financial officer, and one of the few people who could claim to be his friend rather than just a colleague. Thomas nodded, scanning the room with practiced eyes. Better than last year. The donation total should be impressive. He didn't add that he'd personally matched every donation for the past 5 years, anonymously. That wasn't information he shared. "Speaking of impressive," Harold said, gesturing toward the small stage where the quartet was finishing their set. "I hear they've got some of the kids performing tonight. Supposed to tug at the heartstrings and open the wallets." Thomas raised an eyebrow. Calculated but effective. A woman in a navy blue dress approached the microphone. Thomas recognized her as Patricia Winters, the director of Oakwood Children's Home, one of the beneficiaries of tonight's event. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice warm but authoritative. "Thank you all for your tremendous generosity tonight. As is our tradition, we'd like to share with you a small taste of the talent being nurtured at our various programs." Thomas took another sip of his drink, preparing himself for what would likely be an endearing but amateurish display. He had nothing against children. He simply had very little experience with them. His life revolved around quarterly reports, product launches, and strategic acquisitions, not school recitals or soccer games. "First up," Patricia continued, "we have 12-year-old Lily Chen from Oakwood, who will play Beethoven's Für Elise." A small figure made her way to the grand piano that had been positioned at the center of the stage. The girl was thin, almost fragile-looking, with straight black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her dress was clean but visibly worn at the edges, the kind of garment that had been carefully maintained but had seen better days. "That's the Chen girl," murmured Vanessa Park, Thomas's head of public relations, who had joined their small group. Her parents died in that apartment fire on the east side 2 years ago. No relative stepped forward. Thomas nodded absently, his attention caught by the girl's solemn expression as she settled onto the piano bench. She adjusted it slightly, her feet barely reaching the pedals. $10 says she freezes halfway through, joked Alan Thompson, Thomas's VP of sales, who'd had one too many champagnes. "These charity performances always end in tears or disaster." Thomas didn't respond, watching as the girl placed her hands on the keys. There was a moment of absolute stillness before she began to play. The opening notes of Für Elise floated through the hall, hesitant at first but quickly gaining confidence. "Not bad," Harold commented, sounding genuinely surprised. "Kid's got some training." The girl, Lily, continued playing, her small face intense with concentration. Thomas found himself watching her hands, noting how they moved with surprising precision across the keys. The piece was a common choice for beginners, but she played it with a certain sensitivity that suggested potential. "If she plays the piano like that, I'll adopt her," Thomas joked dryly, raising his glass in a mock toast. It was the kind of offhand comment he occasionally made, part sarcasm, part dry humor, expected from the notorious bachelor CEO who was known for his demanding standards in everything. His small circle of executives chuckled appreciatively. Alan slapped him on the back. "Better be careful what you promise, Thomas. Next thing you know, you'll be buying princess beds and attending parent-teacher conferences." "I think you'd make an interesting father," Vanessa said with a smirk. "Your scheduling system would probably include color-coded playdates and educational milestones." Thomas rolled his eyes. "Hardly, besides I was joking. The last thing I need is—" He stopped mid-sentence, suddenly aware of a presence nearby. A server had been refreshing the water glasses at the high-top table behind them, and was now staring at him with wide eyes. The young woman quickly looked away when Thomas met her gaze, but the damage was done. She hurried off, throwing one last glance over her shoulder. Great, Thomas muttered. Nothing travels faster than gossip at these events. Harold shrugged. No one takes these things seriously, Thomas. By tomorrow, everyone will be focused on the next bit of society news. On stage, Lily finished her piece with a delicate final note. There was a moment of silence before the crowd broke into polite, appreciative applause. The girl stood, gave a small bow, and hurried off stage, her eyes downcast as if uncomfortable with the attention. She was actually quite good, Vanessa commented. With proper training, who knows? Thomas nodded non-committally, already shifting his thoughts to the major contract negotiation scheduled for Monday morning. The performances continued. A group of teenage boys performed a choreographed dance routine, followed by a young girl who sang a slightly off-key rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. As the evening progressed, Thomas circulated through the crowd as expected, shaking hands with potential business partners and exchanging pleasantries with the city's elite. He was in the middle of a conversation with the mayor when he felt a tap on his shoulder. Mr. Richardson, might I have a word? He turned to find Patricia Winters looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Excusing himself from the mayor, he followed her to a quieter corner of the room. Ms. Winters, I hope the donation totals are satisfactory this year, he said, automatically shifting into his professional tone. Very satisfactory, thank you, she replied, then paused. Mr. Richardson, one of our staff members, overheard a comment you made earlier during Lily's performance. Thomas frowned slightly, trying to recall what she might be referring to. Then it hit him, the adoption joke. He felt a flash of irritation, both at himself and at whoever had passed along his private comment. Ms. Winters, I assure you it was merely a figure of speech. I meant no. Actually, she interrupted, her eyes lighting up with an unexpected enthusiasm, I think it might be a wonderful opportunity. Thomas blinked. I'm sorry? Lily has been with us for nearly 2 years now, Patricia continued. She's a remarkable child, brilliant really. She taught herself to play piano using an old keyboard donated to our music room. What you heard tonight was after only minimal formal instruction. Thomas began to feel a creeping sense of discomfort. Ms. Winters, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Of course, the adoption process is quite thorough, she continued as if he hadn't spoken. There would be home studies, background checks, a matching period. But for someone of your standing in the community, I'm sure we could expedite certain aspects. Thomas stared at her, momentarily speechless. The woman actually thought he was serious. Before he could formulate a response that wouldn't sound completely heartless, a small movement caught his eye. Standing just behind Patricia Winters was Lily Chen, her dark eyes wide and fixed on Thomas's face. The expression she wore was one he recognized immediately, hope desperately trying to disguise itself as indifference. It was the same look he'd worn as a boy, waiting to see if his perpetually busy father would remember to come to his school science fair. The girl quickly looked down when she realized he'd noticed her, her thin shoulders hunching slightly as if to make herself smaller. Ms. Winters, Thomas said carefully, lowering his voice, this is hardly the place to discuss such matters. Perhaps your office would be more appropriate. Relief washed over Patricia's face. Of course, Mr. Richardson, I completely understand. Shall we say Tuesday morning? Around 10. Trapped by his own careless words and the expectant faces before him, Thomas found himself nodding. Tuesday at 10. As Patricia led Lily away, the girl glanced back once and Thomas felt something unexpected, a twinge of guilt mixed with an odd sense of responsibility. He'd built his career on the power of words, on promises made and kept. Now, a throwaway joke spoken without thought had created ripples he hadn't anticipated. Harold appeared at his elbow, 2 fresh drinks in hand. Everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Thomas accepted the drink and took a long swallow. I may have just talked myself into an adoption meeting. Harold nearly choked on his scotch. You're not serious. Apparently I am now. Thomas sighed, watching as Lily disappeared into the crowd, a small figure in a worn dress carrying the weight of yet another adult's careless promise. What are you going to do? Harold asked. Thomas straightened his shoulders, falling back on the decisiveness that had built his empire. I'll go to the meeting, explain the misunderstanding, and make a generous donation to their music program instead. Clean, simple, everyone saves face. But as the evening wore on, and Thomas found his gaze repeatedly drawn to the children from Oakwood who stood in a small group near the refreshment table. He couldn't quite shake the image of Lily's hopeful expression, or the nagging feeling that perhaps this time, a clean business solution might not be enough. Thomas Richardson stared at the clock on his office wall. It was 9:57 a.m. on Tuesday, 3 minutes before Patricia Winters from Oakwood Children's Home was scheduled to arrive. For a man who typically filled every minute with productive work, he'd accomplished surprisingly little that morning. His thoughts kept drifting back to the charity gala and the mess he'd created with one careless remark. "Mr. Richardson?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Winters has arrived. She has someone with her." Thomas frowned. He'd expected Patricia Winters, not a +1. "Give me a minute, then send them in." He stood, straightened his tie, and moved to the small seating area near the window where he sometimes held less formal meetings. Better than the imposing desk, he thought. Less intimidating. The door opened and Patricia Winters walked in, her sensible navy suit a stark contrast to the elegant dress she'd worn at the gala. Behind her, half hidden, was Lily Chen. Thomas felt his practiced smile falter. "Ms. Winters, I wasn't expecting—" "I hope you don't mind," Patricia said warmly. "Lily was so excited about the possibility of meeting you again. She hasn't stopped practicing since the gala." The girl looked up at the mention of her name, her dark eyes serious and watchful. She wore a white blouse and a plaid skirt that hung a bit too loose on her small frame. Her hair was pulled back in the same simple ponytail as before. "Practicing," Thomas echoed, gesturing for them to sit. Patricia beamed. "For her audition, of course." Thomas blinked. "Audition?" "Well, yes," Patricia continued, settling onto the couch with a rustle of papers from her briefcase. "You mentioned that if she played well enough, you'd consider adoption. Lily has been practicing day and night." Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was worse than he'd anticipated. He glanced at Lily, who stood quietly with her hands clasped in front of her, watching the exchange with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "Ms. Winters," he began carefully, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. My comment at the gala was, well, it wasn't meant to be taken literally. It was just a figure of speech." Patricia's smile dimmed slightly. "Oh," the single syllable hung in the air, laden with disappointment. Lily's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, a subtle withdrawal that made her seem even smaller in the large office. Thomas cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable in a way business negotiations never made him feel. "I had planned to discuss making a donation to your music program instead. Perhaps enough to fund a teacher specifically for piano lessons." Patricia nodded slowly, professional composure returning to her features. "That's very generous, Mr. Richardson. Our children would certainly benefit from such a program." She began to gather the papers she'd just removed from her briefcase. Forms, Thomas realized with a twinge of guilt. Adoption forms. "However," Patricia continued, a new note of determination in her voice, "since we're here, would you mind terribly if Lily played for you anyway? She's been practicing a new piece specifically for today." Thomas hesitated. The sensible thing would be to end this meeting quickly, write a check, and get back to his actual work. But the girl was looking at him now, her expression carefully neutral in a way that seemed too practiced for a 12-year-old. "I don't have a piano here," he said, grasping for an excuse. "Actually," Patricia countered, "your assistant mentioned there's a baby grand in the executive lounge on this floor. Apparently, it was your predecessor's hobby?" Thomas made a mental note to have a word with his assistant about sharing office details with visitors. "Yes, there is, but please?" The word was so quiet he almost missed it. It was the first time Lily had spoken, her voice carrying a slight tremor that betrayed her nervousness. Thomas found himself nodding before he'd fully decided to do so. "All right. One song." The relief on Lily's face was immediate, though she quickly composed herself. "Thank you, Mr. Richardson." They walked down the hallway to the executive lounge, a space Thomas rarely used. The piano sat in the corner, gleaming under the recessed lighting. It had come with the office when Thomas took over as CEO, and while he'd considered removing it, something had stopped him. Perhaps the memory of his mother, who had played beautifully. Lily approached the instrument with reverence, running her fingertips lightly over the polished wood before sitting on the bench. She adjusted her position, seeming tiny against the grand piano. "Whenever you're ready." "Lily," Patricia encouraged. Thomas leaned against the wall, arms crossed. preparing himself for what he assumed would be another rendition of Für Elise or another beginner's piece. He'd listen politely, compliment her progress, then guide them firmly back to his office to finalize the details of his donation. Lily's hands hovered over the keys for a moment. Then she began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the room, and Thomas felt his breath catch. This was no beginner's piece. The Nocturne required technical skill, emotional depth, and years of training. Yet here was this slip of a girl, playing from memory, her small hands stretching to reach the intervals. There were imperfections, a rushed passage here, a slightly fumbled note there, but beneath the technical flaws was something rare, genuine feeling. Lily played as if she understood the melancholy beauty of the piece, as if the notes were words in a language she spoke fluently. Thomas found himself moving closer, drawn by the unexpected performance. A memory surfaced, his mother at their old upright piano, playing this very piece while a storm raged outside, telling him that music was how people shared feelings too complex for words. He glanced at Patricia and found her watching him rather than Lily, a knowing look in her eyes. She'd planned this, he realized. She'd known exactly what she was doing by bringing Lily here today. The final notes of the Nocturne faded, and Lily's hands came to rest in her lap. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Thomas cleared his throat. That was unexpected. It was an understatement, but words suddenly felt inadequate. How long have you been playing? Lily looked up. Almost 2 years, sir. Ms. Winters found an old keyboard someone donated. It was missing some keys, but I could still practice on it. 2 years, Thomas repeated, trying to mask his astonishment. Most students would take 5 or more years to reach this level, and that was with weekly lessons and daily practice on a proper instrument. Lily has a gift, Patricia said quietly, but our resources at Oakwood are limited. The keyboard finally stopped working last month. She's been practicing on a paper keyboard she drew herself. Thomas looked at the girl more carefully. There were calluses on her fingertips, he noticed, and a certain tension in her posture that spoke of determination beyond her years. Why Chopin? He asked, genuinely curious. I found a book of his music in the donation box, Lily replied. There was a CD too, but it was scratched. I could only listen to parts of it. I liked how it sounded sad but beautiful at the same time. Something shifted in Thomas's chest, an uncomfortable feeling he couldn't immediately identify. He'd built his life around clear decisions, logical choices, and measurable outcomes. This situation, this girl, defied his usual metrics. Mr. Richardson, Patricia said, breaking into his thoughts, I understand your comment at the gala wasn't intended as an actual offer, but I hope you can see why I thought it might be worth exploring. Thomas nodded slowly, his mind racing. Yes, I can see that. Lily needs more than just music lessons, Patricia continued. She needs stability, opportunities, a future. The chances of adoption decrease significantly once children reach her age. Lily had turned away slightly, pretending to examine the piano keys, but Thomas could tell she was listening intently. Ms. Winters, he said, keeping his voice measured, adoption is a major life decision, not something to be entered into lightly or because of a misinterpreted comment at a charity event. Of course, Patricia agreed readily. That's why there's a process. Home studies, background checks, a period of getting to know each other before any final decisions are made. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. I don't have any experience with children. My schedule is demanding. I travel frequently. Many parents work demanding jobs, Patricia pointed out, and many learn as they go. No one is born knowing how to be a parent. Thomas looked at Lily again. She met his gaze steadily, her expression guarded but hopeful. What do you think about all this? He asked her directly. You've been very quiet. Lily seemed surprised by the question. She thought for a moment before answering. I think people say things they don't mean sometimes. My dad used to say he'd take me fishing every summer, but he was always too busy with work. He didn't mean to lie. He just forgot that words matter. The simple observation hit Thomas with unexpected force. Words matter. It was something his mother used to say to him when he was young. I won't be upset if you don't want to adopt me, Lily continued, her voice stronger now, but I wanted to play for you anyway. To show you I'm serious about music, maybe. Maybe you could just help me find a piano I could practice on sometimes. Thomas felt something twist inside him. admiration mixed with shame. This child who had lost everything wasn't asking for a home or a family. She was asking for a piano. What if, Thomas heard himself saying, we start with something smaller than adoption? Maybe you could come play this piano sometimes. We could get to know each other. The words hung in the air between them, an unplanned offer that surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise Lily and Patricia. Really? Lily asked, her composure slipping to reveal naked hope. Thomas nodded, a decision crystallizing even as he spoke. Yes, let's start there and see where it leads. Patricia was beaming now, clearly trying to contain her excitement. That sounds like an excellent beginning, Mr. Richardson. As they walked back to his office to discuss the practical details of this unexpected arrangement, Thomas caught Lily running her fingers along the wall of his hallway, as if touching something precious. He wondered, with a mixture of trepidation and curiosity, what exactly he had just set in motion with his impulsive offer. The donation check for the music program would still be written, he decided. But somehow, in the space of a single piece of music, it had become an addition to his plans rather than the entirety of them. 3 weeks had passed since Thomas had agreed to let Lily practice on the piano in the executive lounge. What had started as a twice-weekly arrangement had quietly evolved into an almost daily occurrence. Thomas's assistant, Nancy, would pick Lily up from Oakwood after school and bring her to the office, where she would practice for an hour before being driven back. Thomas hadn't planned to interact with her much during these sessions. He was busy after all. Conference calls, quarterly projections, acquisition negotiations. But somehow he found himself making excuses to walk past the lounge, pausing in the doorway to listen, sometimes even stepping inside to sit quietly while she played. Today was different. Today was the day of the performance. It had been Harold's idea, born during one of their late-night strategy sessions as the sound of Lily's playing drifted down the hallway. The girl's got talent, Harold had commented, pausing mid-sentence during their budget review. Real talent. She should play for the board meeting next week. Show them the community outreach program is more than just tax write-offs. Thomas had initially dismissed the suggestion, but the idea took root. Not for the board meeting, that felt too much like using Lily as a prop, but perhaps a small gathering, a recital of sorts. And so, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Thomas found himself standing in the executive lounge, watching as his maintenance staff arranged chairs in a semicircle around the piano. Nancy had ordered refreshments, printed simple programs, and even found a small flower arrangement for the top of the piano. You've gone to a lot of trouble, Thomas observed. Adjusting his tie nervously, Nancy smiled. It's not every day we have a concert here. Besides, the entire marketing department is buzzing about your young protégé. Thomas frowned. She's not my protégé. She's just a girl who needed a piano. Nancy gave him a look that said she knew better but wouldn't argue. The guests will start arriving in 20 minutes. Ms. Winters is bringing Lily over separately. She wanted to get her ready at Oakwood first. Thomas nodded, trying to ignore the knot of tension in his stomach. He wasn't sure why he felt nervous. This wasn't his performance, yet somehow it mattered to him that it went well, that Lily felt successful, that the small audience of colleagues he'd invited were impressed by her. The lounge began to fill. Harold arrived first, followed by Vanessa from PR, a few of the senior managers, and Thomas's sister Beth, who had driven in from the suburbs specifically for this event. Beth had raised an eyebrow when Thomas called to invite her, but had simply said, "Wouldn't miss it," in a tone that suggested a longer conversation would follow. At precisely 4 o'clock, Patricia Winters arrived with Lily. Thomas felt his breath catch slightly. The transformation was subtle but significant. Lily's hair was styled in a neat bun rather than her usual ponytail. She wore a simple blue dress that actually fit her properly, new, Thomas realized, and polished black shoes. But more striking than the physical changes was her demeanor. Though clearly nervous, she carried herself with a quiet dignity, her back straight, her gaze steady. "Mr. Richardson," she greeted him formally, extending her hand as they'd practiced during one of their brief interactions. "Ms. Chen," he replied just as formally, shaking her hand and fighting an unexpected smile. "We're honored to have you perform for us today." A flicker of a smile crossed her face before she composed herself again. "Thank you for the opportunity." Patricia beamed beside them, looking from Lily to Thomas with poorly concealed delight. Lily has been practicing her program for hours every day. She's added 2 new pieces since you last heard her play. Thomas nodded, impressed by her dedication. Well, we're all looking forward to hearing them. Nancy appeared at his elbow. Everything's ready when you are, Mr. Richardson. Thomas cleared his throat, suddenly aware that everyone was looking at him expectantly. Public speaking had never bothered him. He regularly addressed shareholders, gave interviews, led meetings. But this felt different. More personal. Thank you all for coming, he began, addressing the small gathering. Many of you know that Richardson Enterprises has long supported the city's youth programs, including Oakwood Children's Home. Today, we have the privilege of hearing a performance by one of Oakwood's residents, Lily Chen, who has been using our facilities to practice. He gestured to Lily, who stepped forward with a slight bow. Lily has been playing piano for just over 2 years, Thomas continued, aware that this fact still astonished him. She is entirely self-taught, with only limited access to proper instruction or instruments until recently. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. Without further ado, I present Ms. Lily Chen. Thomas stepped back, taking a seat in the front row next to his sister. Beth leaned over, whispering, 2 years? That's impossible. Watch, was all Thomas said in reply. Lily approached the piano, adjusting the bench with practiced precision. She sat, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. The room fell silent. She began with Chopin's Nocturne, the piece she'd played for Thomas that first day in his office. But there was a difference now, a confidence that hadn't been there before, a fluidity to her movements that spoke of hours of focused practice. Thomas found himself watching her hands, marveling at how they stretched to reach the difficult intervals, how they moved with both precision and feeling. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of stunned silence before the audience broke into enthusiastic applause. Lily acknowledged it with a small nod before positioning her hands again. Her second piece was Bach, more technically demanding than the Chopin, with intricate fingerwork and complex rhythms. A small frown of concentration appeared between her brows as she navigated the challenging passages. There were a few missed notes, a stumble in the middle section, but she recovered quickly, pushing through to the end with determination. More applause, louder this time. Thomas glanced around, noting the impressed expressions on his colleagues' faces. Harold caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up. For her final piece, Lily paused longer, her hands hovering above the keys as she gathered herself. Then she began to play something Thomas didn't recognize, something slower, more contemplative. It took him a moment to realize it wasn't a classical piece at all, but a simple, haunting melody that seemed somehow familiar. Is that? Beth whispered beside him. Thomas nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Mom's Lullaby. The melody their mother had played for them as children, the one she'd composed herself. Thomas hadn't heard it in over 30 years, not since her death when he was 16. Yet here it was, flowing from Lily's fingers. He looked at Patricia, who gave him a small smile. She asked me about your family, she explained softly. I mentioned your mother was a pianist. Lily found a recording in an old interview you gave to that business magazine years ago. You were talking about influences in your life, and they played a clip of your mother performing. Thomas turned back to Lily, seeing her in a new light. This wasn't just practice and technical skill. This was research, attention to detail, and a level of emotional intelligence that caught him off guard. The lullaby came to its gentle conclusion, the final notes hanging in the air like a question. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then the room erupted in applause, people rising to their feet. Lily looked up, surprise crossing her face at the standing ovation. Her eyes sought Thomas's, uncertain, seeking approval. He found himself on his feet, clapping harder than anyone, a strange tightness in his chest. When their eyes met, he nodded, hoping she could see what he couldn't find words to express. As the applause continued, Harold stepped forward, handing Lily a bouquet of flowers that Thomas hadn't even noticed had been prepared. She accepted them with a shy smile, looking suddenly very much like the 12-year-old she was rather than the poised performer of moments ago. That was extraordinary, Vanessa from PR said, approaching Thomas as people began to mingle, helping themselves to the refreshments Nancy had arranged. Absolutely extraordinary. And you say she's only been playing for 2 years? Thomas nodded, watching as Lily was surrounded by his colleagues, accepting their congratulations with quiet dignity. What's the story here, Thomas? Beth asked, her voice low. You invite me to a piano recital out of nowhere, featuring a girl from Oakwood who just happens to play Mom's lullaby. Thomas sighed. It's complicated. Beth raised an eyebrow. I've got time. Before Thomas could respond, Lily appeared before them, still clutching her bouquet. Mr. Richardson, she said formally, thank you for allowing me to perform today. The pleasure was ours, Lily, Thomas replied. Allow me to introduce my sister, Beth. It's nice to meet you, Ms. Richardson, Lily said, extending her hand as she'd done with Thomas earlier. Beth took it, smiling warmly. Just Beth is fine. Your playing was beautiful, Lily, especially that last piece. Lily nodded. Mr. Richardson's mother wrote it. I hope it was okay that I played it. It was more than okay, Beth assured her, giving Thomas a meaningful look. I think it was exactly what some of us needed to hear. A small smile tugged at Lily's lips. I practiced it the most. I wanted to get it right. Thomas felt something shift inside him, a wall crumbling that he hadn't even realized he'd built. This child, with her serious eyes and determined spirit, had reached past his carefully constructed defenses and touched a memory he'd locked away years ago. You did, he said simply. You got it exactly right. As the gathering continued around them, Thomas found himself wondering what his mother would think of this unexpected turn of events. Of Lily. Of the music filling his office after so many silent years. Of the strange feeling taking root in his chest that felt dangerously close to attachment. For the first time since making his careless joke at the charity gala, Thomas allowed himself to consider a possibility he'd been avoiding, that perhaps Lily Chen was meant to be more than just a girl who needed a piano. The view from Thomas's penthouse apartment stretched out across the city skyline, lights twinkling against the darkening evening sky. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of scotch untouched in his hand, his mind far away from the quarterly reports waiting on his laptop. It had been 2 months since Lily's performance in the executive lounge. 2 months of increasing complication in what Thomas had intended to be a simple arrangement. The sound of his phone ringing pulled him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. Beth. His third missed call from his sister this week. With a sigh, he answered. Before you start, he said by way of greeting, I'm fine. Just busy. Too busy to return your only sister's calls? Beth's voice held a note of concern beneath the teasing. I haven't heard from you since our lunch last week. Thomas moved away from the window, sinking into the leather couch that had been chosen more for its aesthetic than its comfort. I've had a lot on my mind. Lily? Beth asked directly. Thomas was silent for a moment. Among other things, have you made a decision yet? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Patricia Winters had approached him after Lily's recital, tentatively raising the possibility of moving forward with a more formal arrangement. Perhaps a mentorship program at first, then fostering, with the potential for adoption if all went well. It's not that simple, Thomas finally said. It never is, Beth agreed. But it's been 2 months of twice-weekly visits, Thomas. The home study has been completed. Patricia said all the paperwork is ready. At some point you have to decide. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd found himself making more frequently lately. I know. What's holding you back? His sister's voice softened. And don't tell me it's work, because I know you well enough to know that's not it. Thomas stared at the modern art piece hanging on his wall, all clean lines and cool colors, selected by his interior designer to make a statement. He'd never really looked at it before, he realized. Had never really looked at much of his own home. What if I'm terrible at it? He asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. At what? Being a father? At any of it. Being responsible for another person. Making decisions that affect someone else's life. I've spent 20 years building a company, Beth. I know how to do that. I don't know how to do this. Beth was quiet for a moment. Do you remember when I had Noah? Thomas thought back to the birth of his nephew, now a teenager. Of course. Do you remember what you said to me in the hospital when I was panicking about bringing him home? Thomas smiled slightly at the memory. I told you that if you could run a department of 30 engineers, you could handle one baby. Exactly, Beth said. And now I'm telling you, if you can run a Fortune 500 company, you can handle one 12-year-old girl. It's not the same thing. No, it's not, Beth agreed. It's harder in some ways and easier in others. But Thomas, I've seen you with Lily. You're already halfway there. Thomas was saved from responding by a beep on his phone, an incoming email. I have to go, Beth, work. His sister sighed. Just promise me you'll think about what I said, and maybe consider why you're so afraid. I'm not afraid, Thomas replied automatically. Sure you're not, Beth said, not unkindly. Call me tomorrow, okay? After hanging up, Thomas checked the email that had come through. It was from Harold with a subject line that read simply, Thought you should see this. Thomas opened the attachment, a video file. He clicked play and the executive lounge appeared on screen. It must have been taken during Lily's recital, likely by someone's phone. The camera was focused on Thomas rather than Lily, capturing his expression as she played her final piece, his mother's lullaby. Thomas stared at himself on the screen, almost not recognizing the man he saw there. The carefully maintained mask of professional detachment had slipped completely, revealing a vulnerability he hadn't shown in public for decades. The look in his eyes as he watched Lily play. He closed the video, unsettled. His phone buzzed again, a text from Nancy, his assistant. Just a reminder, Lily's school concert is tomorrow at 7 p.m. You asked me to keep your schedule clear. Thomas had almost forgotten. Lily had mentioned it during her last visit, trying to sound casual as she explained that Oakwood's children were participating in a music program at the local high school. She hadn't directly asked him to come, but the invitation had been clear in her careful phrasing. It's not very fancy, but Ms. Winters says it's good experience for us to perform in different places. He'd told her he would try to make it, watching as she nodded with that same guarded hope he'd seen at their first meeting. Thomas stood, moving restlessly around his spacious apartment. It was a beautiful space, modern, elegant, expensive. It was also, he realized as he looked around, entirely unsuitable for a child. All sharp edges and breakable objects, no warmth, no color, nothing that suggested life was actually lived here rather than merely displayed. In the spare bedroom he used as a home office, Thomas opened his laptop and pulled up a file he'd been avoiding. The home study report Patricia had sent him weeks ago. He'd read it once quickly, noting that he'd passed all the basic requirements for becoming a foster parent. Single status wasn't a barrier. Income and stability were more than adequate. The background check had been clean, but there were recommendations as well. Changes that would need to be made if a child were to live here, safety measures, age-appropriate spaces, a sense of belonging. Thomas closed the laptop and walked back to the window. The city sprawled before him, the life he'd built for himself laid out in steel and glass. It was a good life by most measures, successful, comfortable, respected. But standing alone in his perfect apartment, Thomas was forced to acknowledge what Beth had been gently suggesting for weeks. It was also a lonely one. The thought of changing it was terrifying. He'd spent years constructing this carefully controlled existence, where problems had solutions, decisions were based on data, and emotions were kept neatly contained. A child, this child, with her serious eyes and unexpected talent, would shatter that control entirely. His phone rang again. Patricia Winters, Mr. Richardson, she greeted him when he answered. I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all, Thomas replied, slipping automatically into his professional tone. What can I do for you, Ms. Winters? I wanted to check if you'd had a chance to review the documentation I sent over. I know you're very busy, but the approval process can take time and— I have, Thomas interrupted. I'm still considering the options. There was a pause. I understand, Patricia said carefully. It's a significant decision. But I should mention that we've had another inquiry about Lily. Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. Another inquiry? Yes, a family in the suburbs. They came to the charity concert at the high school last month and were quite impressed with her playing. They've begun the application process to become foster parents with the potential for adoption. I see. Thomas's voice was neutral, betraying none of the unexpected surge of emotion her words had triggered. And is this something Lily wants? Another pause. She's cautiously optimistic. She's met with them twice. They have a piano in their home, and 2 other children close to her age. It could be a good fit. Then I'm happy for her, Thomas said, the words automatic and hollow. Mr. Richardson, Patricia said, her voice gentler now. Lily asks about you every day, when you'll visit next. what you thought of her latest piece, whether you might come to her school concert tomorrow night. Thomas closed his eyes. I plan to attend. Good, that's good. Patricia hesitated. I don't mean to pressure you, but if you are interested in moving forward with Lily, it would be helpful to know soon, for everyone's sake. After ending the call, Thomas stood motionless, trying to process the conflicting emotions churning inside him. The thought of Lily going to another family, living in another home, playing piano for someone else. It created a physical ache he hadn't expected, but wasn't that what he should want? For her to find a stable home with a real family, people who knew how to care for a child, who had chosen this path deliberately rather than stumbled into it because of a careless joke. His phone buzzed with yet another message. This time it was from Nancy again, sending him the address for tomorrow's concert along with a calendar invite. The subject line read, Lily's Big Night. Thomas's gaze fell on a framed photo on his desk, the only personal item in the entire apartment. It showed him as a boy of about 10, sitting at a piano beside his mother. Both were smiling, caught in a moment of shared joy. It was the last photo taken before his mother fell ill. His father had sold the piano a month after her funeral. No use for it now, he'd said gruffly, drowning his grief in work and distance. Thomas had followed his example, channeling his own pain into ambition and achievement. It had worked, mostly, until a girl with serious eyes and determined hands had started playing his mother's lullaby, and old wounds he'd thought long healed had torn open again. Thomas picked up his phone and scrolled to a number he rarely called, his company's head of real estate. Jackson, it's Richardson. I need you to find me a different apartment, something larger, with at least 2 bedrooms, and close to a good school with a strong music program. He paused, then added, and I'll need recommendations for an interior designer, someone who specializes in creating spaces for children. After hanging up, Thomas returned to the window. The decision wasn't made, not completely. There were 1,000 reasons to walk away, to let Lily go to a family that already knew how to be one. But for the first time, Thomas allowed himself to truly consider the alternative. A life with unexpected music in it. A life with Lily in it tomorrow, he decided. He would go to her concert tomorrow, and perhaps in seeing her play among her peers, in a normal school setting rather than his rarefied corporate world, the path forward would become clear. For tonight, he had research to do. Thomas opened his laptop again and typed into the search bar, how to talk to a 12-year-old girl about her future. It was a start. The family court building was nothing like Thomas had imagined. He'd expected something grand and imposing, like the federal courthouse downtown with its marble columns and echoing halls. Instead, he found himself in a building that looked more like a worn-out office complex, with scuffed floors and fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in an unflattering glow. Nervous? Harold asked, straightening his tie as they waited on a bench outside courtroom C. Thomas shot his friend a look. I'm about to legally commit to raising a child I've known for less than 6 months. What do you think? Harold chuckled. I think you've faced down billion-dollar acquisitions with less preparation than you've put into this. It was true. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of activity. Meetings with social workers, parenting classes, therapy sessions for both himself and Lily, endless paperwork, and the complete renovation of his living space. The sleek bachelor penthouse had been transformed into a home with color and warmth. Lily's room had been painted a soft blue at her shy request, with built-in bookshelves and a small electronic keyboard that would soon be replaced by a proper upright piano. What's taking so long? Thomas muttered, checking his watch again. Their hearing was scheduled for 10:30, and it was already 10:45. Courts always run behind. Patricia Winters said calmly from her seat across from them. This is actually moving quite quickly for an adoption proceeding. Adoption. The word still sent a jolt through Thomas every time he heard it. How had a careless joke at a charity gala led to this moment? To him sitting in family court, waiting to legally become the father of a 12-year-old girl? The door at the end of the hallway opened and Thomas's breath caught. Lily walked toward them, accompanied by her caseworker, Karen. She wore a navy blue dress they'd bought together last weekend, her hair pulled back in a neat headband. Her eyes found Thomas immediately, a mix of excitement and nervousness in her expression. Sorry we're late, Karen said as they approached. Someone was a little anxious this morning and needed some extra time. Lily ducked her head slightly but then straightened her shoulders. It was a gesture Thomas had come to recognize, her way of gathering courage. "You look very nice," Thomas told her, surprised by the roughness in his voice. "Thank you," Lily replied formally, then added with a small smile, "So do you." Before Thomas could respond, the courtroom door opened and a clerk appeared. "Richardson and Chen? Judge Powell is ready for you now." Thomas stood, surprised to find his legs unsteady. He felt a hand on his arm and looked down to see Lily beside him, her small fingers gripping his sleeve. "It's going to be okay," she whispered, and Thomas nearly laughed at the role reversal, the child comforting the adult. But he simply nodded, placing his hand over hers briefly before they followed the clerk into the courtroom. The proceedings were both more formal and more personal than Thomas had expected. Judge Powell, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes behind practical glasses, spoke directly to both him and Lily. She reviewed the case file, noting the unusual circumstances of their meeting, the progression of their relationship, and the extensive preparations Thomas had made. "Mr. Richardson," the judge said, peering at him over her glasses, "in your petition, you state that you wish to adopt Lily as a single parent. Are you fully aware of the responsibilities this entails?" Thomas cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Honor. And you understand that this is a lifetime commitment? That once this adoption is finalized, Lily will be, in the eyes of the law, your daughter in every way?" "I do." The judge turned her attention to Lily. "And you, young lady, you've had several meetings with the court-appointed counselor to discuss this adoption. Do you have any questions or concerns you'd like to share with the court?" Lily sat up straighter. "No, Your Honor. I want to be adopted by Mr. Richardson." She paused, then added softly, "By Thomas." It was the first time she'd used his first name. They'd discussed it during one of their sessions with the family therapist, but Lily had continued to call him Mr. Richardson, a formality that had become a small barrier between them. Hearing his name from her now, in this moment, felt significant in a way Thomas hadn't anticipated. Judge Powell nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "I've reviewed all the reports from social services, the home study, and the recommendations from the various professionals involved in this case. While the circumstances that brought you together were unconventional, to say the least, it's clear that a genuine bond has formed." She shuffled some papers, then looked up again. "Before I make my ruling, I'd like to ask one more question." Her gaze fixed on Thomas. "Why, Mr. Richardson? Why this child? Why now?" The question caught Thomas off guard. It wasn't part of the standard proceedings they'd prepared for. He glanced at his lawyer, who gave a small nod of encouragement. Thomas took a deep breath. "I could give you practical answers, Your Honor. I could talk about Lily's potential, her talent, her intelligence. I could tell you about the programs I've researched, the opportunities I can provide, the future I envision. But that wouldn't be the whole truth." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The truth is, I didn't plan this. I made a thoughtless joke at a charity event, and somehow it led to the most meaningful relationship I've had in decades. Lily." He glanced at the girl beside him, finding her watching him intently. "Lily reminded me of things I'd forgotten. That music can heal. That words matter. That it's never too late to become the person you might have been." The courtroom was silent. Thomas continued, his voice steady now. "I want to adopt Lily because I can't imagine my life without her in it anymore. Because every time she plays the piano, it feels like coming home. Because she deserves a family who sees how extraordinary she is, and I want to be that family. Even if it's just the two of us." Judge Powell studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Richardson." She turned to Lily. "And do you have anything you'd like to add, young lady?" Lily hesitated, then spoke in a clear voice that carried through the quiet courtroom. "When my parents died, I thought that was it for me. No more family. At Oakwood, they told us older kids don't get adopted very often, so I stopped hoping for that and just focused on music instead." She glanced at Thomas, then back to the judge. "But then, Mr. Richardson, Thomas heard me play. And even though he didn't mean to say what he said at first, he still gave me a chance. He listens when I play. He remembers what pieces I'm working on. He asked me what color I wanted my room to be." Her voice grew softer. "No one had asked me that in a really long time." Judge Powell smiled gently. "And that matters to you?" Lily nodded. "It means he sees me as a person, not just A case, or a charity project. She straightened her shoulders again. I choose him too, Your Honor. I choose to be his daughter. Thomas felt something catch in his throat, a physical manifestation of the emotion that had been building inside him throughout these proceedings. Judge Powell set down her papers and folded her hands. Well then, based on all the evidence before me and the clear commitment expressed by both parties, I find that this adoption is in the best interest of the child. She smiled. I hereby grant the petition for adoption. Lily Chen is now legally Lily Chen Richardson, with all the rights and privileges thereof. She picked up her gavel. This court recognizes the creation of a new family today. With a sharp tap, it was done. Patricia Winters was the first to offer congratulations, tears streaming unashamedly down her face. Harold clapped Thomas on the back, while Karen hugged Lily. The lawyer began explaining the final paperwork that would need to be signed. In the midst of it all, Thomas felt a small hand slip into his. He looked down to find Lily standing beside him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Is it really official now? She asked quietly. Thomas nodded, his own vision blurring slightly. Yes, it's official. Lily took a deep breath. Can I call you Dad now? The word hung in the air between them, fragile and monumental. Thomas had thought about this moment, had even discussed it with the therapist, but hearing it now made every practiced response flee his mind. Instead, he knelt down so he was at eye level with her. I would be honored if you called me Dad, but only when you're ready. You can take all the time you need. Lily studied his face for a moment, then nodded solemnly. I think I'm ready. She squared her shoulders, took a deep breath, and said with deliberate clarity, Thank you, Dad. The word transformed something in Thomas's chest, breaking and healing simultaneously. He pulled Lily into a hug, feeling her thin arms wrap around his neck in return. Thank you, he whispered into her hair. Later, as they walked out of the courthouse, into the bright spring sunshine, Lily turned to him with sudden excitement. Can we go see the piano now? Thomas laughed. The delivery isn't scheduled until tomorrow. I know, but I want to see where it's going to go. I've been thinking about the acoustics in the living room, and I think we might need to add a rug to soften the sound. A rug, Thomas repeated, amused by her seriousness. Anything else? Lily considered this as they walked toward the car where Harold waited to drive them home. Maybe some plants? Ms. Beth says plants make a house feel more alive. Plants and a rug, Thomas agreed. We can do that. As they reached the car, Lily hesitated. Do you think your mom would have liked me playing her piano? The question caught Thomas by surprise. The upright piano being delivered tomorrow had been his mother's, stored in Beth's attic for the past 30 years. It had been Beth's idea to have it restored for Lily. Thomas placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. She would have loved it, Lily, almost as much as she would have loved you. Lily smiled, a full, unguarded smile that Thomas had seen more and more frequently over the past months. Then I'll play extra well for her too. As they drove away from the courthouse toward the home they now officially shared, Thomas reflected on the strange, winding path that had led him here. A careless joke at a charity gala, a girl who needed a piano, a lullaby he'd thought he'd forgotten. Sometimes, he thought, watching Lily gaze out the window with quiet excitement, the most important promises are the ones we never intended to make.